What do you see when you imagine the future? When we picture what's to come, we often think of innovations that take us to new heights. Some of them are already here, and every day, thousands more make the jump from our imagination into reality. Nowhere is this more evident than here in Japan. Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies are fundamentally transforming the way we do things. All this is happening so fast, and we must do more than just keep up. These emerging technologies open up boundless possibilities of what our future could look like. Technology is not a simple solution to our problems. It poses questions that we need to answer and guidelines we need to write together. That's why we're all here. A global event hosted by Japan that brings together the world's leading voices across disciplines and geographies. How technology will shape our tomorrow depends on the choices we make today. And that starts now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ina Fried, Chief Technology Correspondent for Axios. Thank you so much for joining for what I think will be an insightful and important discussion on a topic that we really do need to be talking more about. I've covered technology for 20 plus years in Silicon Valley, and oftentimes we hear companies talking about what they can do, what the barriers are, what they're going to do next, what they need to happen to do that thing. Too often, though, we don't talk about, should we do this at all? How do we do this? Who might be impacted? How might these products be misused? So I'm really glad to be talking about responsible innovation, to hear more talk in the industry about it. But now the question is, okay, we know we need to innovate responsibly. What does that look like? How do you actually do that and do that well? Fortunately, I don't have to answer that. I'm joined by an incredible panel of people from inside the technology industry, as well as some folks from outside to offer some additional perspectives. I'd like to welcome the panel who's all here. Thank you very much. And I thought to get things started, it would help if everyone sort of introduced themselves by way of saying, how have you been looking at this topic of responsible innovation? And first up, we have Aaron from PayPal.
Great, thank you, Ina, and terrific to be here. Thank you, Wef, for putting on this great conversation, and happy to be here with my panelists and with everyone who's attending. By background, I was a prosecutor for the first third of my career in the area of financial crime and cybercrime. That probably influences a little bit the way I see the world and the way I think about responsible innovation, which I think is a critical and important topic. Currently at PayPal, when we think about responsible innovation, it's exactly the questions that Ina mentioned. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And part of what you need to have internally is the mechanisms and the governance to be able to have those questions discussed at the right times, at the right levels of the company. And even when it's a yes, an almost bigger question is the how, right? And just as an example, one of the hows that I think we try to use that we hope is effective is we think about customers in the broadest sense. So not just will this product and service be clear and useful and great for our consumer customers or business customers, but also we see our regulators as our customers. And are we meeting their expectations? And law enforcement in certain areas is also our customer. Are we meeting their expectations? Sometimes we have other companies or industry colleagues that we also need to do right by. So I think thinking it through in that comprehensive way and having the mechanisms to do it is very helpful. And the final thing I'll say, just as the intro, I think it's really all about culture. You can put in mechanisms, but you have to create the right culture, which is not easy to do, to make sure you're asking those questions.
And next up, we have Zvika Krieger, who's now at Facebook, previously of the World Economic Forum. Zvika, talk about how you've approached this, both in your time at Facebook, talk about your relatively new role at Facebook, as well as some of the work you did before coming to Facebook.
Thanks, Ina, and really great to be here, particularly with all of my former forum colleagues, and glad to be talking about a topic that's so close to my heart. I come at this from similar and different angles as Aaron. I spent most of my career working in government, both in the US State Department and US Defense Department, looking at the responsible use of technology and how might policy enable the design and deployment of technology in a responsible way. And the more time that I worked with tech companies in Silicon Valley, from my perch in DC and then moving out to the West Coast, I recognized that while regulation and and legislation and policy is really important, government is actually only one piece of the equation, and that it's actually the responsibility of technology companies to think about and to design these technologies responsibly. What I always like to say is that technology is that policy is the floor, not the ceiling. And so in my time at the forum, I got to work not only with governments around the world to help them think about how to make regulations that are fit for the fourth industrial revolution, that can keep up with the unprecedented change of speed and scope of emerging technology, but also work with tech companies. So I worked with over 20 tech companies to think about how do you create a responsible innovation initiative within an organization, and then eventually took the learnings from that and transitioned to Facebook about a year ago, where I've been leading our responsible innovation team over the past year to think through how do we do this on the ground in a company like Facebook. So really excited to tackle some of the questions that are on the agenda for today.
And Marnie Webb is from TechSoup, which I know is the place that nonprofits go to get their discount software, but obviously you do a ton more than that. Can you talk about how the companies or the organizations that you work with are both trying to implement this within their own organizations, but also make sure that their organization's voice gets heard as the tech companies are making products that impact them deeply?
Absolutely. And first off, like everybody else, I'm happy to be on this panel with all of these other panelists, but also talking about a topic that's so important. So one of the things that we think about so TechSoup works with literally hundreds of thousands of grassroots organizations all over the world and helping them think about their technology. We work with large and small technology companies and helping process donations of those products to community-based organizations. And one of the things that we think about an awful lot is how we work for the collective good of communities and how the innovation is focused on solving problems that the community members have. So it's both working with grassroots organizations to innovate on top of existing technologies, but it's really how do you work with a grassroots organization to and groups of grassroots organizations and community members to develop the design questions that the innovations are responding to, so that the community owns the problem and the articulation of that problem, and it's not just a free-floating innovation. And how do you give the community members access to all parts of the innovation process, from the creation of the design problem, sort of owning the problem space, to actually being involved in the innovation, and then to being able to gather insights from the way people use the innovation, something that often belongs only to the innovators, so they can help respond to issues that might arise, unintended consequences of the innovation on the ground. And they can make sure that digital solutions and digital innovations are accessible to as many people as possible.
That makes total sense. And we'll come back to what I think is a really important piece of this, which is when do you involve people outside your organization? And certainly, I'm sure that's a topic you have thoughts on, as well as the whole panel. Before we do that, our fourth panelist is Molly Wright-Steenson from Carnegie Mellon, and you bring a ton of different expertise to this. From everything from architecture to some of your current work, which, if I'm not mistaken, is actually looking at how well does the public understand that? When we talk about responsible innovation, does that even mean anything to the public? And, really sort of, we want this dialogue that hasn't been happening in the industry to happen, and it's starting to happen. But we also need, as a society, to start talking about these innovations, whether it's facial recognition or emotion detection, all these things. It's important that the public start to have a conversation. So I'd love to hear about the work you've been doing and where you see that level right now.
Sure, Ina, it's great to be here. Thanks so much, and wonderful to be here with my fellow panelists at the World Economic Forum. I come from Silicon Valley, and then I came to a PhD in architecture after being a design professor, kind of a strange way of going about things and landing on ethics. But I think that all of these things fit together in a really important way. Design and architecture is where the public experiences the decisions that are made about responsible innovation, or what we hope will be responsible innovation, picking up on a little bit about what Marnie was just saying. One thing that I'm doing with my research group at Carnegie Mellon is studying AI ethics frameworks and the ways they do and don't translate into general knowledge and the general public. Right now, they're good at operationalizing and making their way into new practices within companies, but we don't see that as readily in the press. We're studying 14,000 news articles to see what we find, and we just don't find the uptake there. So it begs a question for me: what does the public need to know about responsible innovation, and what is our role, or what are our roles in bringing that to bear?
Awesome. And Aaron, if I can go back to you, I want to get more concrete with what we mean when we're talking about this. So talk about what responsible innovation looks like inside PayPal. Who do you make sure is in the room? What are you looking for? Is it privacy, security, accessibility, community impact? What specifically? Because if you aren't looking for it specifically, you're definitely not finding it. And if you have an example where a problem was avoided or a negative consequence was avoided by the sort of foresight of the process, I think it's helpful for people if you can be as concrete as possible.
Sure. I mean, the answer is yes, yes, and yes. And I think an example maybe would be helpful. So, we've recently entered into the cryptocurrency space. And we actually did that in a pretty methodical and very thoughtful way. Again, taking that expansive view of the customer, right? And in terms of how we do that at the company level, we do have a very well developed risk and compliance infrastructure and organization that touches every part of the company, and we are just integrated, which is really the ideal way to be. You want to be there from inception of idea to execution and ongoing supervision. And so when we as a company think about getting into cryptocurrency, wanted to make sure we had something that was really good for our customers and make sure there's something that they would understand and be able to benefit from and have a great experience. We also spent a lot of time with a number of regulators sharing what our plans were. And in the government, there's different levels of awareness and understanding and concern. And so taking the time to meet with multiple members of government agencies and regulators to give them comfort in what we were doing, how we were doing it. Same thing with law enforcement to show that AML, anti-money laundering, financial crime was not an afterthought, but actually a primary thought. So consumer protection top of mind, financial crime prevention top of mind, and investing the time, effort, and energy with all of those stakeholders so that when we finally entered the market, we actually had a simultaneous press release from the New York regulator sharing their excitement about our launch. And that's because I think we took a very, innovative but responsible approach. And I'd even say that I think we see being responsible as a source for innovation in and of itself. And there's a variety of times that we actually use interesting technologies to do things in a responsible way to protect our customers or do good in the world.
And Zvika, you lead a fairly new team, about a year old, within Facebook. How does that work? How does your team interface with the people that are designing products? When are you brought in? And what sorts of disciplines and expertise does the people on your team have to help address these sort of issues?
Great questions. And so I think that in terms of when do we engage, what I've learned over the past year at Facebook is that the earlier that you can engage, the better, right? That if you're just a box checking exercise, or if a product is about to launch in a week and the team says, hey, can you do an ethics check on this? That's not a real engagement. And so when we were formed, we really decided to focus my team's energy. Of course, there are many teams at Facebook that work on responsibility related issues and helping to anticipate potential harms. But the responsible innovation team, we're specifically looking early in the process when teams can ask those foundational questions and can say, should we even be building this product? Or can we think about harms in a really broad way, and where we're not rushing to meet a launch deadline, but we can actually shift the foundational fundamental direction of a product. And so we tend to engage relatively early. And picking up on your thread, Ina, it's really important to bring in those diversity of perspectives. And so that's, first of all, on our team, we've been building a really diverse team. We've got folks with backgrounds in sociology, anthropology, neuroscience, human rights, diversity and inclusion, civil rights, law, safety. I mean, just we've sort of optimized, I kind of call it like my X-Men or like Captain Planet group of expertise, because the range of products that we're dealing with is so broad, and the ways that people use it is so broad, that you really need that diversity of perspectives. But it's not just enough for our team to have those diverse perspectives. Obviously, product teams need to have those diverse perspectives as well. And we know that tech is an infamously not diverse sector. And so the efforts that Facebook and other companies are taking to diversify our workforce is essential to be able to identify that broad range of harms. Because if you're, like a company like Facebook, where we've got over 3 billion users around the world, you can't have people just in Silicon Valley who are trying to anticipate all the ways in which these products might be used or abused elsewhere in the world. And so I think having both internal diversity, opportunities to bring in external experts, which is something that my team does as well, and having that diversity on the team is absolutely essential.
And talk a little bit about the impact that your team has had. Is there an example you can give where a product either wasn't launched in its original form or was significantly changed because of the concerns that came out of that process? Or how can you best share with us sort of the impact that your team's work is having?
Yeah, well, as I said, because most of our work is focusing on products that are early in the product development process, and a lot of them haven't even been launched yet, it's hard to talk about what hasn't happened. But I can give one example of something that happened recently. Is that in light of the interest and excitement this summer in the United States around racial justice in the Black Lives Movement and the post-George Floyd protests, there was a lot of excitement about how do we support Black-owned businesses on our platform. We obviously have a lot of e-commerce products and opportunities. And so one of our teams on Instagram wanted to create a sticker for Buy Black, so that people can show their support for Black-owned businesses. And while that was obviously a very well-intentioned product and could bring a lot of benefit and really help elevate economic justice and opportunity for a historically underrepresented group, there's also a trade-off where by highlighting a marginalized or historically marginalized or vulnerable group, you may actually be making them a target of increased harassment or abusive behavior. And so what we were able to do was provide teams with guidance that when you are creating well-intentioned products to help advance racial justice, you actually need to look out for where some of those increased risks for abuse might be. And so the Instagram team was actually able to learn both from other teams at Facebook that have grappled with similar challenges, by connect with external experts who could help them anticipate where those higher vectors for abuse might be, and make sure to put in place the resources and the support needed for those communities before we were able to launch, to ensure that they had a safe experience on the platform. And so I think that the reason why I bring up that example, other than it's sort of top of mind for me today, is that that's a good example of a product that it was not intended to have a negative impact. It was actually a really noble and positive intention. And I think that sometimes the caricature that a lot of folks have about these product decisions is that you've kind of got a profit motive, and then potential harm to people. And in my experience at Facebook, so many of the issues that I deal with are about a well-intentioned product that might actually have unintended consequences. And the earlier that you can surface those concerns, the more effectively you can address them before launch.
And Marty, the grassroots organizations that you work with at TechSoup, do they feel included? Because we hear all this great stuff from the tech companies, including the work that we've heard about. And what I hear often is that there's a lot of expertise out there that these nonprofits working on the ground, they could have told you this would happen, X negative externality, if only someone had asked them. Do the nonprofits with technical expertise, as well as the ones that work with different communities, are they being listened to? Is there more opportunity to tap their knowledge and leadership?
Yeah, I definitely think there is more opportunity. I mean, certainly some organizations feel heard. Whether organizations feel listened to or not is going to vary widely across organizations. But I think in general, what we hear, organizations are hungry to share what they need and what their communities need from technology. So it's not just that they want to warn against the impact or a lack of access or an unintended consequence. They also want to be able to say, but here's what we really need to be able to do, or ways that we want to be able to organize and mobilize. So a way to communicate that, because so often the organizations that we serve are so often helping people that are invisible to so many of our technology systems and so many of our government systems, and the things that sort of count our data by where we spend money and what we click on, make a lot of people invisible when we're making decisions. And grassroots organizations can be representing those individuals, so we see them wanting to bring not just their knowledge, but the needs of the communities that they work with, so they can say, what does civic engagement look like for people that may not be able to vote?
And Molly, I want to draw on your architecture expertise in a second to look at how should we structure these teams and how much it matters. And one of the questions I already got from one of the attendees is, who needs to be involved in this? And it strikes me that that's really a huge part of the fundamental question is, not should we be doing this? I hope we all agree that there should be responsibilization. But what does that mean? Does that mean you have a team whose job it is? Does that mean it's everyone's job? Does the CEO need to be involved? When does the public come in? And with the minutes we have, that's really one of the focus. How do you do this right? What works and what doesn't? And I thought we'd start with you, Molly.
Sure. I mean, my answer to the question is who should be involved is yes. I think everybody should be involved, and that it's a vital part of responsible innovation across the board. The CEO needs to be involved. The coders need to be involved, the engineers, the developers, the designers. It depends on how you frame this question of responsibility. I think that that's really the major thing. And when you are able to frame it larger, you're going to be better able to see potential blind spots on one hand, but see potential opportunities on the other. I come at this from my position in a school of design where our students don't necessarily know how to code. They may learn it along the way. It's not a requirement of our program to do the Python that a computer science student does. But our students are really adept at understanding people and human needs and translating those into things that we design for. When I look at responsible innovation, I think of it in those kinds of terms. And I also think of it in terms of this question of sometimes innovation isn't newness, it's making use of what you already have. And so if you're looking at responsible innovation across an organization, you certainly want to be looking at all of the assets that you have, all of the tacit know-how, and putting that to use as you perform new and better innovative ways of working.
And Marnie, when is the right time to bring in outsiders? Is it early on in the process? Is it when you have something that you have kind of built and you want to see what people think of it? What advice would you give, not just Zvika and Aaron, but a lot of these companies? When is a good time to bring in outside perspectives?
Yeah, we always think it's great to make it available to outside perspectives as early as you can. Recognizing that that's going to vary with the kind of technology, and also you're going to get different engagement from different people along the way. But making it available and showing communities that there's a pathway to commenting and participating is important, I think, and we've seen at all parts of the process. You know, it's practically hard, but there are a lot of sort of community organizing principles that can be used to get input, even when companies can't be quite as direct for a variety of reasons. I just want to say, I think the other thing is to make it clear to organizations how they can use or engage with something after it's been built is also a key part, because civil society organizations can be a pipeline to so many other users, but they have to see how it connects to the needs of their users too. And so that early on communication can help with that part as well.
And Zvika, I want to address this question, when do you bring in people from outside the organization? But I also want to draw in, historically, tech companies have looked at the user and specifically the consumer of products. But how important is it also, as we talk about things like facial recognition, surveillance cameras, all these kinds of things, how important is it to look at not just the people who might buy this product, but bystanders that might become involved in the product, whether it's glasses with facial recognition, Amazon's Ring cameras, etc. Do we need to include not just the person buying it, but everyone affected?
Yeah, it's a great question. To get back to the first question about when to bring people in, you know, Facebook has an incredibly robust apparatus for consulting with a wide range of populations, recognizing that we can't be in, you know, our workforce can only be so diverse. And so, you know, we have everything from policy roundtables where we bring together civil society groups and community groups from around the world. We have our oversight board, which has gotten a lot of attention lately, which has pretty diverse representation. We have our UX researchers that go out into the field and meet with users, you know, from shopkeepers in rural Rwanda to single mothers in India to as wide a range as possible to really be able to get that perspective of who is our user, and not assuming the people designing the technology are the same as the people who are going to be using the technology. And we on the responsible innovation team, we try to bring those perspectives in early. And we, of course, bring in a lot of academics and folks with deep subject matter expertise, but we also try to bring in the voices, particularly of historically underrepresented or marginalized groups, which is a perspective that often doesn't have a seat at the table. And we try to bring in even the voices of folks like artists and philosophers and community leaders that may not be subject matter experts, but they have lived experience that can help expand the horizons. Because when you're developing these frontier technologies, like you were talking about, Ina, that haven't existed before, you really need to have that creative mindset of broadening the aperture of what the realm of possibilities might be. And so bringing those voices in early and in a way that product teams can engage directly with them is absolutely essential to anticipating that wide range of potential harms.
And Aaron, you're going to get the last word here. Obviously, we've just begun to scratch the surface on a super important topic. What's one thing we haven't talked about yet that people should be aware of?
Actually, I'll just add to one of your last questions, if that's okay, which was the who. And I think if you're going to be really successful at this, it has to be everyone, and it has to be in the DNA, right? And I don't think you'll have ongoing sustainable success at being responsible at innovation if you only have like one group tasked with being the innovation, the responsible group, and everyone else is sort of rubbing against that. I think it has to become part of the DNA, which is why I think in my opening I talked about culture. Right? And you have to have that tone at the top from the CEO on down that's amplified, that has a variety of techniques that are used to resend that message, reward that good behavior. So when an engineer is then coding, right, they're coding thinking about privacy. They're coding thinking about, oh, this will be really good from a consumer champion perspective. Oh, this will help the financial crime team make sure that bad stuff's not happening on our platform. And then you're actually all rowing in the same direction, And I think that is the ultimate goal. It's obviously not easy, which is why not everyone has done it yet. And you may never reach that nirvana, but I think that needs to be the goal. It needs to be in the DNA of who you are as a company.
Well, sadly, that brings us to the end of the public plenary part. As I said, this is really the beginning of a conversation that we need to be having inside the tech companies and inside society. We need to be asking these questions of tech companies and also asking our leaders where we want rules. If this is a topic you want to hear more about, I do a free daily tech newsletter for Axios. You can go to getlogin.axios.com. I'd love to have you part of that conversation as well. For those who joined in on the public webcast, thank you so much. For those who are attending the forum, we have another breakout session coming up, so please stay with us. So we're going to allow just a minute for that transition. But again, thank you to this great group of panelists, and let's make sure to keep this important discussion going.